I probably have wondered this myself at some point. Have you found that the 5 stages of grief that we hear about, do you think that's accurate? Do you think they are in order? And is there supposed to be a time frame for these?
Okay, so as for the time frame, absolutely not. And I always tell everyone there is no time frame on grief. You take as long as you need to get through what you need to get through. As for the 5 stages, mine happen to fall in order. I don't think they always do, but eventually you will. Acceptance is the final one, and you will get there. I usually explain to people that it's like a ladder, and each stage is a step on that ladder. And sometimes you move up to the next stage and the next stage, and you fall back down, and you go back to the stage you were at. And that's okay. You know, it's okay. I always tell people it's okay to not be okay. You know, you're going to move up and you're going to fall down. You know, you have to just keep trying to move up till you get up to the top of that ladder. But there's lots of times you just fall back down.
Welcome to the Managing Mental Health podcast. Join us as we talk to leading psychologists about all areas of mental health, and we hear from real people that have overcome real mental health struggles who can now share hope and encouragement for us all. I'm Jamie, social psychologist, author, and trauma recovery coach. Our guest today is Lisa Rites. Lisa is a native of South Orange, New Jersey, and the youngest of 3 children. With over 40 years of experience as a registered respiratory therapist, she has transitioned into her new role as a certified grief educator. She felt a deep calling to engage with individuals navigating the complicated journey of grief. Her experiences working closely with patients and their families facing the inevitability of grief and death, along with the profound impact of her own family losses and divorce, made her increasingly aware of the emotional turmoil that accompanies such life-altering events. This realization ignited a passionate desire within her to support others during their darkest times, helping them to find solace and understanding in the midst of their pain. Lisa, welcome to the show.
Hi, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Good to be here.
Yes, glad to talk to you. So, grief is pretty universal, I would say. I think everybody on the planet can and probably will experience some form of grief during their lives. Wouldn't you think so?
I definitely agree with that. Even if people don't think they're experiencing grief, they definitely are experiencing grief. And that's why I became a grief educator, just to try and educate society more on what grief is and that it's okay to experience grief. Unfortunately, I feel in society, everybody is taught you grieve, somebody passes, 3 days, you're back to work, and life goes on. But people don't realize that grief can last, a couple weeks, it could last years, it could last a lifetime. And that's what I do now, is just work with different clients and helping them learn different coping strategies to get through the different parts that they're in during grief.
Okay, nice. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And we'll get into some more details in terms of some of those misconceptions about grief, because there's a few that I have in mind that I've heard, for many, many years. So in your role, do you work with individuals, families? Do you teach classes?
So I do a little bit of everything. I have individual clients that I work with, but I also run education workshops. They're usually 4 or 6 week workshops where you sign up. We give you the educational materials, and each week we dive into a different area of grief and educate on that area and try to give some coping mechanisms to help people. And then I always allow time at the end of that group for people to share, to try and help each other with what they're going through. So I do enjoy the groups. I do like educating people. So that's one of my favorite parts. But yeah, I do work with both types.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. So how did you get here? What led you to becoming this grief educator?
So think, like you said, I was a respiratory therapist for over 40 years. Basically dealt with anyone who had any sort of lung disease. We know how that usually ends. It's not
Mm,
usually a good ending. So I've dealt with grieving families. I've dealt with grieving patients. I just felt that looking for something else to do as I was, moving on with my life, I found grief education. And I thought this would just be a great way to tie in everything I've had in the past to things that I've been through. And I didn't realize I was going through grief at the time. I just actually finished writing my first book about navigating grief and divorce, and it is my process through my divorce. It's my story. But I do talk about all the different stages of grief while going through that book. And then I just basically talk about what I experienced when I was in that stage. So when I was in school to become a certified grief educator, I really didn't think that grief had to do with divorce. I thought grief was death, and that was it. But I learned so much, and just so much about how grief is pretty much anything, such as right now in the real world with killings and school shootings, and the whole world can be grieving. So, and people just don't realize it. So there is grief everywhere.
yes, and that's a great point. And I want to come back to that question in a minute. Before we kind of get into more of the understanding of grief itself and the process and all of that, you mentioned, so you're writing your book, or you've got your book coming out, and it's about the grief of your divorce.
Mm-hmm.
What did that feel like for you? How was that? How would you say you felt different, or your experiences were different from just, okay, this is a bad thing and I feel sad about it?
Right. So going through it, yes, that's how I felt. But I
Mhm.
didn't realize that there were all these phases that I was going to go through. And looking back and realizing every phase that I went through is why I decided to tell my story. My story happens to have a good ending where my ex and I are still amicable.
Mhm.
And for the sake of my children, we still can be close friends. Not everybody can end that way.
Mhm.
But going through, I went through right in the beginning when it first happened, and I first found out I was going to get split up. Nobody gets married to get divorced, and that was my first thought, and was the why me, and what did I do wrong, into the anger stages, where I stayed for a very long time. I was very angry at what happened. I was very angry at my ex. Tried not to take it out on my children, got a good support system that I could talk to, tried to work my way through that, eventually started to heal and tried to find myself again, which was one of the things I really liked, was kind of finding myself again and finding that person I was before I got married and before I had children. Things I used to like to do, reading, art, crafts, that kind of stuff I started doing again, and it made me feel so much better. And that was a positive, and that was kind of my turnaround to start healing. And then I started moving into the acceptance stage, where I really had to realize this was happening. I couldn't change it. So now what am I going to do about it? So as I moved into that acceptance stage, I started just realizing, you know what, I'm not going to hate him for the rest of my life. I have children. I have to live my life. And I just didn't want to be angry anymore. It just wasn't worth it for me. So I moved into the next phases and, just worked it out with him. And, we were able to keep it amicable. And, my goal at the end of my book is, even if people can't get through the journey and still speak to their ex, and I understand that, I hope I help them find some inner peace, that they can move on into acceptance and learn how to move on without this person. Don't forget all the things you did, the memories, the good times, but it's time to move on and start to get yourself back up and moving. So that's what I'm hoping. And that's what I like doing when I'm working with all of my clients or my groups. I like to see that positiveness when somebody says to me, oh, I went out on my own and I joined a biking group. And it's like, great, good, good for you. You're healing. And it's just very rewarding in the position I'm in to be able to watch and see people grow amongst themselves. So I really enjoy that.
Okay. A couple of interesting things. So you mentioned stages, and this is
Hmm.
one of the questions I had. And earlier you mentioned time frame.
Hmm.
So this is sort of a two-part question that
Sure.
I've heard other people ask, and I probably have wondered this myself at some point. Do you or have you found that the 5 stages of grief that we hear about, do you think that's accurate? Do you think they are in order? And is there supposed to be a time frame for these?
Okay, so as for the time frame, absolutely not. And I always tell everyone there is no time frame on grief. You take as long as you need to get through what you need to get through. As for the 5 stages, mine happen to fall in order. I don't think they always do, but eventually you will. Acceptance is the final one, and you will get there. I usually explain to people that it's like a ladder, and each stage is a step on that ladder. And sometimes you move up to the next stage and the next stage, and you fall back down, and you go back to the stage you were at, and that's okay. It's okay. I always tell people it's okay to not be okay. You're going to move up and you're going to fall down. You have to just keep trying to move up till you get up to the top of that ladder. But there's lots of times you just fall back down. So I can't say it's always in order. You're going to work your way through, but sometimes you just slide back down, and we just work through that.
Yeah. I think that's very similar to other aspects of mental health healing, trauma recovery, even physical healing, like from an accident or
Hmm.
something that has a severe impact, is that there's progression, but there's also times of regression,
Hmm.
and that's a very normal thing for all of these issues when you're on that journey of healing. That's just part of it, and it doesn't feel good
Right.
when it happens. You feel like a failure in a sense. You feel like, okay, I'm never going to get there, or
Hmm.
why is this still affecting my life in this way? um, but but that's normal, and so I'm glad that you mentioned that.
Yeah, it is normal. And that goes along with part of the education part, to explain to people and have them understand that it is normal and it's okay. Because I'll have people say, I can't get past anger. I'm just anger and I'm anger, and that's a long one for people to go through sometimes because they are very angry. But we use different types and different mechanisms to try and get past that stage. But yeah, it is what it is, and it does take as long as it can take. And sometimes people fall back a lot more than others do, and sometimes people get right through it and they move on. But people don't also realize that grief is, like I said, it's not just a death. It's from an end of a long relationship, or a divorce, or a loss of a job. It's from society today. It really is from anything. When I do like fairs and stuff, and when I talk just to people who are walking up to my booth, and first thing I say is I'm a grief educator, and they're like, oh, who isn't in grief? I just feel like at some point, like you said, everybody's going to be in grief at some point, whether they realize it or not.
Yeah, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I kind of see grief as in two, I guess, two parts of loss. One, you lose a person, so there's an emotional connection, and on the other hand, you lose your future vision
Hmm.
for whatever that is, whether it's like you mentioned, a job, whether it's like you're talking about in terms of society today. We kind of, nobody wants to live in turmoil. And so you have this dream, so to speak, the American dream. That's kind of where that
Hmm.
comes from, is you kind of want to be in a place, in a life where you have certain accomplishments, you have a certain lifestyle, family,
Hmm.
career, all this stuff. And when something happens to take that away, you're grieving the loss of
The
what
loss.
you were planning on.
Sure. And I
Um,
think that's what a lot of people don't realize, that that is grief,
yeah.
or that can be grief. And again, when you lose your job, go with that one. Why did I lose my job? Let me try to get my job back. Those are those phases,
Mhm.
denial, bargaining, and then you're angry because you lost
Mhm.
your job, right?
Mhm.
So now you've got to rebuild. You've got to pull yourself together and accept it. You don't have your job and you need to move on. And what are you going to do now? So yeah,
Yeah.
it's still going to go through the same phases that you do no matter what it is. There's grief prior to a death. I mean, for caregivers or family members that are taking care of their parents, not
Uh-huh.
understanding what's happening or what's happening to their parents. I deal a lot with educating that also, and trying to explain the changes that are about to happen,
Mhm.
especially once that person's gone.
One thing that I'm curious about then is, and I've heard pros and cons on both sides of this coin. I would love to hear your perspective. In terms of death, let's just go with that aspect of grief. A family member, somebody you love, a friend, close friend. Do you think, or have you noticed, is it better to know that it's coming, or is it better to not know, for it to be just sudden? Because you just mentioned that people will actually start grieving before the loved one actually passes away.
Mm-hmm.
So they know it's coming. They may not know when, or,
Right.
if you've got somebody that's been in an accident, or they have a serious disease, cancer, whatever, they're in the
Mm-hmm.
hospital, that it's coming. So what do you think is better, or is neither one better?
I don't think either one is better. I don't think I don't think one is better than the other. I think it's just like, I can give you an instance. My husband now had a massive heart attack and died on the table. They were able to bring him back because we were in the hospital, and he survived it. And they call it a widow maker because normally you don't survive the type that he had. But I was in the room when he went down. Obviously, as a respiratory therapist, I knew what was happening. But when he passed down, I was screaming for someone to come in. And when I walked out of the room, the only thing I could say, I said, to God, is this it? I didn't get to say goodbye. Like, is this the end? Like, this can't be how it ends. Like, no, 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 no. It can't end like this. I didn't say goodbye. So, and then, he was taken care of, and he's fine, and he's here, and thank God. But that was a horrible feeling. And it was a very scary feeling that was it. So I can't say that that's better, because that whole grief part would have probably been a whole different ball game than if somebody was passing and you kind of have that time to say goodbye and then start your grief process. So I don't know. I guess I would assume that sudden's going to be worse if you don't see it coming, just because there's a lot of some guilt. There's some other feelings I think that you're going to go through. And the fact that if it's a car accident or a suicide or some kind of a sudden death like that, what could you have done to prevent it? Oh, if it was a car accident, if I didn't fight with him this morning, or if I think there's a lot of guilt that would go along with the sudden death versus an anticipatory death that's coming your way.
That's a good point. Yeah, I think that's something that people don't anticipate, is that there's possibly going to be some guilt
Mm-hmm.
as part of their own grieving process, as part of the loss. Um, and I don't think people are prepared for that
Mm-hmm.
when it happens. How does so? What are some of the other, like, misconceptions about grief itself? What are some things that we often get wrong?
I think the most important thing is that people don't realize that you can grieve for a long time. Again, I just believe that society has taught us that you do what you're supposed to do. The person passes, you do it your ceremony, your passage, whatever it is. And then just look at corporate America. Within 3 days, you have to come back to work and you have to be fully functional. And I think people don't realize that they might be there, but they're still grieving, and we're told that, okay, that's it, move on. I think a lot of misconceptions are when people are talking to you and they're like, you're grieving too long. Why are you still sad? You need to move on. You can get past this. It's going to get better every day. So all those things that people say to you, you don't really want to hear it because you're being told that that's the way it's supposed to be. I try to educate people, even in my groups, if we're doing education, and again, it's free before a loss, trying to teach them how to talk to somebody after grief and how to not say those things, because you know what? They might not be okay. I had someone in my group that was telling me a story, and she used to play cards every week with her girlfriends. And at one point, I don't remember, how long it was, does it matter? But at one point, her friend said to her, you know what? You've just been grieving too long. I'm tired of hearing your stories. So she stepped out of the group and she found different people. But it's things like that I think society doesn't understand, that people can grieve for a long time. And I think the more educated we make everyone, the more understanding people will be of the grief process.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. What about like the acceptance stage? So a person, like, I'll just use an example, someone that I know personally.
Mm-hmm.
This couple had a teenage son, and he died suddenly from a car accident. And they went through grief, understandably. And I think at some point they probably did make it through the stages and reach a point of acceptance and were able to move on and carry on with their life. But the mother, especially, like on the anniversary of the death,
Mm-hmm.
will re-experience, will re-feel some of those same feelings, in terms of the deep sadness and missing, the son. So is that normal too? Like, even though a person may have sort of processed this grief and this loss, that from then on they may still have that type of experience?
Sure, I think they will. One of the things I educate on when I have that kind of a situation, if we've gotten that far and we're in that acceptance stage, we talk about on the anniversary of the death or on their birthday to celebrate it. When you're talking about your child and they ask you how many children you have, say you have 3, 1 passed. You still have 3. You had 3 children. A lot of people, they'll just be like, oh, I only have 2 now. But no, you have 3 children. 1 has passed, and try to talk about it that way. And yes, on their birthdays, definitely say their name, celebrate them. I'm not saying you have to have cake, blow out candles, but just celebrate their life. Maybe put something out. If you're a Facebook person, throw something out in a post just to celebrate them. And that's okay. And people shouldn't say to that person, oh my goodness, you're still putting out his name. Well, yeah, that's your child. And it's never going to stop being your child. So people need to understand that. And the loss of a child, I have 3, 4 children myself and grandchildren. So I can't even imagine what that would feel like. But yes, definitely, you would want to continue to celebrate. That person is still your child. So I do encourage them to celebrate on the day of their death or on their birthday, just to celebrate, them. They're still here. I'm not saying go back to a sadness part. Try to do something, or maybe even an activity you liked doing with them. Maybe you and your son went to the movies. Well, go to the movies that day. Try to do something like that. As long as they're in a good acceptance place, then yeah, try to do something like that. Maybe an activity you share together or something like that.
Okay, yeah, that's a good idea. And yeah, that makes sense. That, uh, you have especially someone that you have a deep emotional connection to, and you lose them, it's, it's only going to be understandable that when there's some type of anniversary or birthday, like
Hmm.
you said, that you're going to think of them and it's going to remind you of that loss. So that's normal. And
Hmm.
I like too that you've mentioned a couple of times now this idea of the other people in the scenario, not offering just platitudes. Um, it's so sometimes it's just insulting.
Hmm.
Sometimes it's, disheartening for you to be going through something and people just offer platitudes like, well, just get over it,
Right.
or just do this and you'll be better. Just
Right.
do that and you'll be better, or whatever. And I think that's one of those things in society that we can all learn to do a better job of, is
Hmm.
not offering platitudes. So what would, in your opinion, be some things? Let's say I know someone is grieving.
Hmm.
I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say to make them feel better. I don't know,
I
other
don't
than
think,
I'm
yeah,
sorry. What
right.
a- what are some good ways to support someone?
Right. So I think after a little while, they don't want to hear "I'm sorry" anymore. I always think that's it's such an interesting thing that we say that, yes, we're sorry, but I feel bad for you that you've lost this person, but we're saying "I'm sorry." There's nothing I can do about it, but it's just a term society uses, and that's fine. But I think if you're meeting up with this person, and even if it's been 6 months or a year, just call them and be like, "Hey, how are you feeling today?" And then, you know what? Don't say anything. Let them tell you. And whatever they tell you, it's okay. Don't try to offer words like if they're saying, "I'm having a really bad day today," or, "I was sitting thinking of my son and I started crying." And then somebody says, "Oh my gosh, you should go out." Don't do that. No, just be like, "Oh, I'm sorry you're having such a rough day today. Is there something I can do?" I always tell people in the beginning, check on others. If you're know someone who just experienced a death, maybe it's a month or two and you haven't talked to them, just call them, just say, "Hey, how are you doing?" Or stop by for lunch if you're home, and bring over some lunch, or and let them talk. I always say people just sit there and listen and let them talk, because that's just what they're looking for. They're not looking for you to say anything. They just want to say what they have to say, because there's really nothing you can say, you know, other than saying, like you said, some platitudes, and just saying, "Oh, okay, okay," or "Oh, that's a shame," or "Oh, have you tried doing, this?" Or, you can't give them advice. So just, I would say, don't try to. Just try to sit and be with them and listen to what they have to say, and just try to empathize with them,
Yeah, to be a
because
good
it's okay.
listener. Yeah.
Yeah, and you might go over there for lunch and they're having a great day, and you might be like, "Hey, how are you feeling?" "You know what? I'm doing really well. I've learned to live with this part, or I've learned that, if I'm thinking of this, I just use this little coping thing, and I get past it, and it's really been helping, and I feel great." "Well, good for you. I'm glad to hear it." Something like that. Or they just might be having a bad day, so then just sit and listen.
Hmm. Okay.
Yeah, I
All
just
right.
don't think there's never going to be the right thing to say, because
Yeah.
somebody's just not going to want to hear it.
Yeah. And I think part of that comes from, and this is just being a normal human being, I think, is we get uncomfortable
Hmm.
around things or people that we can't fix. We kind of have this inner desire to fix the situation or the person.
Correct.
And, that's just not the objective. I think you have to just kind of fight that and say,
Hmm.
okay, no, that's not my role here at this moment, is to try to fix this person.
Right.
It's
Exactly. I
just,
think that's a great point, because I say that to my clients all the time. What are you looking to get out of these sessions? I'm not here to fix you. I can't fix you.
yeah, yeah,
I can't. I can't fix you. I can help you. I can guide you. I can give you steps, but I can't fix you. So, and I think like you're saying, I think society, and you say we're uncomfortable. I think we are uncomfortable around something we don't understand. And I
Yes.
think we all just really don't understand grief. People
Mhm.
just, it's just the way it is out there. And I'm hoping with, myself and all of the other grief educators out there that people can start getting this information out to people to just learn how to process things and navigate that whole process.
Yes, absolutely. Um, what, in your experience, have you seen that um, kind of relates to other mental health issues or self-care issues that typically go along with grief? So when someone's going through grief, and what are some things to kind of look out for?
So depression is one,
Hmm.
falling into some kind of a depressive state, um, alcohol, drinking alcohol or turning to drugs, um, is another process that could happen. But looking for people who maybe not taking care of themselves, cleanliness, staying in their pajamas all day, not wanting to get out of the house. Again, all parts of depression that you really can look for as far as signs. Yeah.
Yeah, and I've seen and heard this both, that people may say things like, "I wish I wasn't here as
Hmm.
well," or "Why couldn't I have died instead of that person?" And I I think that's not for everybody, but I don't think it's um, uh, strange for someone to have some sort of, maybe not full suicidal ideation in terms of wanting to die, but just
Right.
some sort of expression of, I wish I
Right.
wish I wasn't here. I wish I could have been substituted.
Right. And I think we hear that definitely in traumatic deaths.
Mm,
We'll hear that. I think sometimes with a lot of elderly couples, you'll hear it where more like, I don't want to live anymore. I've been with this person for 40, 50 years. And what am I going to do by myself now?
yeah.
I relied on this person. I don't want to be here anymore. And I think you see that a lot with the elderly. Or again, like I said, a suicide or a traumatic death where, a car accident where people are thinking that, oh, I wish that was me instead. Or, why did they take this person? He was so young. I think that's just all part of the normality of it. Again, just part of needing to be educated or in therapy if that's what it takes to be guided in the right direction
Hmm.
so
Good
that you
point.
don't become, suicidal or, a little more hard on yourself than you should be.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So I've got a rabbit to chase, and I'll see what you think about this. Um, what do you think about elderly couples that
Mhm.
they've been together for 40, 50, 60 years, whatever, and one of them passes away, and then the other one passes away a very, very short time after, maybe weeks or months, and
Mhm.
sometimes within a year, usually, or two
Mhm.
at the most. Do you think that's like grief taking its toll? Do you think that's, maybe there's some sort of, spiritual connection of some sort that we
That
just
you
can't quantify?
Yeah. My whole life, I've always, like, when I've seen that or heard that, my grandparents died within a year of each other. And I do believe that my grandmother always took care of my grandfather. My grandfather had Parkinson's. We always thought he was going to go first. My grandmother ended up passing of a heart attack. And within a year, my grandfather was gone. And I just think I always said he couldn't live without her. They were together forever. They were them. And he was just so sad. Knowing now what I know about grief, I do think it is part of the grief cycle that takes over, and they just can't get past. They can't get past the first stage. They're just sad and angry and lonely, and there's just no want to live anymore. You
Yeah,
know, and if they're a spiritual person, they could be praying to their person and being like, just I don't want to stay here. Just take me, and and they go. But yeah, I do believe there's some kind of a love bond there, that when people are together that long, like the Notebook, it's, the ending of the Notebook when they die together in the bed. It's just there's something there to that. It must be an outer thing, but I do believe there's something to that when people are
Yeah.
together that long.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting, and you, you hear about it way too much for it just to be a coincidence.
Hmm.
One or two people going happening, that's a coincidence, but there's been so many stories of that. That's interesting that your grandparents had that as well.
Hmm.
So
Yeah,
very
and
cool.
I do. I just think some people, they're just so and you can see it sometimes with elderly couples. And
Uh,
with what I did, I've been around the elderly a lot. But sometimes you just see that love in their eyes, and I just think when one goes, the other one just doesn't have a will anymore. There's just nothing for them, is how they feel. They're just, even though they could have children and family and grandkids, I just think they're so sad without their other half. It's just that was their whole life.
mhm.
So I think there is something to it. I'm not sure
Yeah,
who takes control
I
of
know,
that.
right?
But
Yeah,
I'm
I
not sure who takes control, but something.
yeah, I think no matter how scientific we get, about the the human condition, about life, everything from learning and mental health and grief and all of these issues, there's definitely more than I think we will ever fully understand,
Hmm.
because there's just too much that's unexplained or unquantified, but it's
Right.
but it's present. It's
Hmm.
observable, but we just don't know how it's there.
Right. And I think, talking about that, I think grief and mental illness definitely can go together. As much as people want to say they don't have any mental issues when they're in grief, but I think it'd be vice versa. People could have mental issues and not know they're grieving. There's just, again, when sometimes we look at these mass shooters, or a lot of them had mental challenges. And what is it, what were they so angry about? What happened, what did they lose that made them so angry, and they never got past that part. And then it just, like you said, it becomes a struggle, and then it just becomes a struggle within, and becomes a big mental issue. And boy, I just hope they can find some people to help all this mental health issues that are out there, because there's just so many of them, just
Yeah,
so many.
yeah, and I think it's important for people to hear you and hear others hit this idea home that you might be in grief, a stage of grief, and not recognize that that's what it is. So,
Hmm.
and especially the anger stage, someone could lose a person close to them, and they may go through the sorrow of it, but then months later, just be so angry and just mad at the world, so to speak,
Hmm.
and not realize, oh, wait a minute, this is still a stage of grief. And
Right.
it, you know, there's some processing that needs to be done.
Right.
Need to talk to someone about it.
Hmm.
So that's very
Yeah.
important.
Yeah, talking is very important. I
Mhm.
mean, how many times, what they used to say, you go postal, but how many times does someone lose a job, right? And they come
Mhm.
back with a gun
Yeah.
because they're in some stage of anger, and that is grief,
Mhm.
which they're not recognizing, because people don't understand that that's grief. They're just angry that they lost
Yeah.
their job. But yeah, if you had talked to somebody, they could help you through that stage again, and then move to the acceptance. And okay, I did lose my job. What can we do tomorrow to make this better? But if you're not talking to somebody, and your mind is just taking over, it just becomes a horrible, can be a horrible situation.
Mhm. Okay.
you know
So, um, other than just the idea of talking with someone about it, what are some other little tips that you have for people that are going through grief?
Depending what stage they're in, um, you know, um, if if you can, just try to look at the next day as a new day. Try and get up and do something that you haven't done in a while for yourself. Self-care is huge. Try to talk to somebody like a support person. I don't mean therapy. I mean, like, maybe go out to lunch with a friend and talk about whatever's bothering you. Like I said, I always excited when somebody does something that they wouldn't have done. Go treat yourself to something. Just go get your nails done, and that might be a huge thing. Or if you're a guy, go grab a beer with a friend or a cup of coffee with a friend. And again, just talk about where you're at, and hopefully that person will listen. I think you do have to talk through some of it, and it's okay to be wherever you're at. But just understand where you're at, and then if you're not going to be talking to somebody or moving on and getting any kind of help or tips, then, just try to do something for yourself. Try to realize the situation may not change. And that's really hard to do if you're not, if you're trying to do it on your own. Just realize the situation is not going to change. Whatever it was that made you so angry, it's probably not going to change. So what are you going to do for yourself to move out of that, or to just do something for yourself? And once you do something for yourself, you'll start feeling better, and then you'll start moving to the next, to the next thing to help you. So those are pretty general. Obviously when you're talking to somebody specifically, more about that person, but generally, yes, you definitely want to just try to find something that you would feel good about. Just take some time for yourself.
All right. Thank you. All right. So how can people get in touch with you to learn more about your services and your book?
So everything is on Facebook. My services, I run my grief groups. I'm getting ready to start one this coming week. So that information is available on my Facebook page right now. If somebody's looking, wants to join. And then on my website, lisaritesgrief.com. There's all kinds of free resources. Just hit the resource button. I have books, free ebooks you can download. I have worksheets, anything like that. It's all free. Just help yourself get what you need. You can always email me if you just want to talk. And then my services are also available on my website. You can sign up for a free consultation, see if this is even something you would need, this kind of service, and then move on from there.
And for our listeners, all of her links will be in the comments or in the discussion part, rather. So feel free to check those out. And definitely, if you feel this is a need for you or someone that you care about is going through grief, talk to someone, Lisa, myself, anyone, and at least just have a conversation about it. Try to get some support, get some encouragement, get those things off your mind that they're there anyways. Just trying to stuff them down and ignore them and pretend and hope they'll go away is not going to happen. And it's only going to make you feel worse and cause other problems, other mental and physical health problems. Mm-hmm. So definitely reach out and get someone to talk to. All right, listeners, what resonated with you the most? Were there any unanswered questions you had? If so, please tell us in the comments. And again, look for Lisa's website and everything in the description. Well, as always, please subscribe, like, comment, and share to stay connected to this community of mental well-being as we learn and grow together.